It was early morning in Blacksburg, Virginia. The air outside was crisp, quiet, almost too calm for mid-April. On the Virginia Tech campus, students were just beginning to stir. Some were still asleep, others getting ready for early classes or part-time shifts. Birds sang in the distance, and the sunlight filtered softly through the trees that lined the walkways of West Ambler-Johnston Hall. At first glance, it was just another peaceful morning in college life, but at 6 a.m. and 45 minutes, that peace began to unravel. Inside his dorm room at Harper Hall, a 23-year-old senior named Seung-Hui Cho sat in silence. His roommates would later recall that he was always quiet, withdrawn, barely speaking even when spoken to. He was known as the boy who never smiled, the one who avoided eye contact, the one whose face remained expressionless, almost frozen. Cho had woken early that morning. He dressed neatly, a gray hoodie, jeans, and a black jacket. He placed 2 handguns carefully into his backpack, a 9mm Glock 19 and a Walther P22, both purchased legally within the previous months. He also carried several magazines of ammunition, along with a few loose bullets, which rattled softly as he zipped the bag shut. Cho had planned this morning. His movements were deliberate, his timing rehearsed. Security cameras later captured him walking calmly through the hallway, his expression unreadable. He exited his dorm, crossed the quiet courtyard, and entered the co-ed West Ambler-Johnston Hall, a dormitory just a few minutes away. It was around 6 a.m. and 45 minutes. The building housed hundreds of students, mostly freshmen, still half asleep in their rooms. He moved up the staircase to the 4th floor. There, in room 4040, 18-year-old freshman Emily Hilcher was getting ready for the day. She was a bright, animal-loving student studying animal and poultry sciences. Friends described her as warm, cheerful, someone who always smiled. That morning, she had just returned from spending the weekend with her boyfriend. Cho entered her room without warning. Witnesses nearby later reported hearing a sudden, sharp sound. One shot, then another, then silence. Within seconds, Cho had fatally shot Emily. Her roommate was not in the room at the time, but the noise drew attention from the hallway. A 22-year-old resident assistant, Ryan Clark, heard the commotion and rushed upstairs to check. Ryan was known for his kindness and sense of responsibility. He was studying biology and English, an honor student with plans to pursue counseling. When he reached the doorway, Cho turned the gun on him. Another pair of shots rang out. Ryan collapsed in the hallway. Both victims would die where they fell. The sound echoed faintly through the building, but at that hour, many dismissed it as construction noise or something falling. The kind of sounds campus buildings often make. Some students later said they thought it was someone hammering on a door or perhaps a firecracker. Few imagined it was gunfire. Cho quickly left the building, slipping out before anyone could react. Campus police were called at 7 a.m. in 15 minutes, but by then Cho was already gone. He walked calmly back to his dorm, blending in among the sleepy students heading out to morning classes. He entered Harper Hall again around 7 a.m. in 20 minutes, changed his clothes, deleted some files from his computer, and removed the memory card from his phone. Then he sat for a while, waiting. When officers arrived at West Ambler-Johnston, they found Emily and Ryan dead. The area was secured, and investigators began treating it as a domestic incident, believing the boyfriend might be involved. Cho's name wasn't even mentioned at first. There was no immediate indication that the shooter was still on campus. No evacuation order was given. No emergency message was sent to students. The morning continued as if nothing had happened. At that moment, thousands of students were walking between buildings, grabbing coffee, joking with friends. In dorm rooms, alarms buzzed, radios played. Some students prepared for exams. None of them knew that a killer was still nearby, planning his next move. Back in his room, Cho sat silently at his desk writing. What exactly he wrote remains unclear, but later, investigators found a disturbing manifesto, pages of angry, disjointed thoughts, resentment toward rich kids, and debauchery. He saw himself as a martyr, a victim turned avenger. His mind was a storm of paranoia and rage, simmering for years, now finally erupting. He had a long history of mental health struggles. Years earlier, in 2005, Cho had been ordered to receive psychiatric treatment after making suicidal comments and stalking two female students. A court had found him mentally ill and a danger to himself, but he was released after a brief evaluation and outpatient order. He never followed up. Professors had noticed his disturbing behavior. Violent writings, chilling plays, dark monologues. Some had raised alarms, but university procedures at the time made it nearly impossible to remove him from classes without a direct threat. And now, 2 years later, those warnings had come full circle. At 8 a.m. and 10 minutes, campus police continued interviewing witnesses from the dorm. Detectives suspected Emily's boyfriend, who was off campus at the time, but no one considered that the killer might be planning another attack. By 8 a.m. and 45 minutes, Cho had left his room again, carrying the same backpack. He walked to a nearby post office on Main Street, where he mailed a large package addressed to NBC News in New York. Inside were photos, a written manifesto, and a video he had recorded earlier that morning, rambling statements filled with anger and resentment. In that video, he stared directly into the camera, wearing a black baseball cap backward and holding his two guns, calling himself the martyr of the oppressed. He spoke in a monotone voice, sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting, blaming others for his loneliness and pain. At 9 a.m., Cho returned to campus. He made his way to Norris Hall, a large academic building where engineering and foreign language classes were held. He walked around the area briefly, observing students entering and leaving. Then he left again, perhaps to prepare. For the next hour and a half, he vanished from sight. Some investigators later believed he returned to his dorm to reload and check his weapons. Meanwhile, university officials debated what to do about the dormitory shooting. Emails circulated internally. Police searched for the suspected boyfriend, trying to locate him. At 9 a.m. and 26 minutes, a vague campus-wide alert was finally sent by email, stating there had been a shooting incident in a dorm and urging caution. It did not mention that 2 people had been killed. It did not say there was a gunman on the loose. Many students didn't even see the message before heading to class. At 9 a.m. and 40 minutes, classes resumed normally. Professors lectured, students took notes. In Norris Hall, one of the professors, Liviu Librescu, an elderly Holocaust survivor and aeronautical engineering professor, was teaching his morning class. He had no idea what was coming. By 9 a.m. and 50 minutes, Cho had returned to the building. He carried his backpack heavy with ammunition, 2 pistols loaded and ready. As he climbed the steps to the second floor, he glanced around, calm, methodical. Then he began chaining the main entrances shut from the inside, using heavy padlocks and cables he had brought with him. The hallways were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming softly. Down the corridor, students were already seated in their classrooms, unaware that their exits were being sealed. The first screams and gunshots would come minutes later. The tragedy that began with 2 fatal shots inside a dorm room was about to explode into the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in American history. The hours between the 2 attacks at Virginia Tech were the most haunting kind of silence, the kind that hides a storm. After the first 2 murders, the campus appeared calm, almost eerily so. The sound of distant sirens faded, and the morning light grew warmer, spreading across the brick paths and red-roofed buildings of the university. Students hurried to classes, laughing, sipping coffee, carrying backpacks filled with notes and laptops. completely unaware that danger still lurked among them. At 8 a.m. in 15 minutes, the bodies of Emily Hilscher and Ryan Clark were discovered by police inside West Ambler Johnston Hall. Officers cordoned off the floor and began questioning witnesses, trying to piece together what had happened. They found shell casings, blood, and evidence of forced entry. The scene was tragic, but investigators quickly developed a theory: a domestic dispute. They suspected that Emily's boyfriend, who was off campus, might have been involved. It seemed logical, given that domestic violence cases often turned deadly, and most campus shootings until that point had involved personal conflicts, not random massacres. Meanwhile, in another part of campus, Seung-Hui Cho was already back in his own dorm room. He had slipped away unnoticed, blending in with the morning flow of students. There was no police presence at Harper Hall, no alarm, no urgency. As he sat at his desk, Cho prepared what would become one of the most infamous media packages in history. Inside his room, he recorded a video using his digital camera. The footage showed him sitting against a blank wall, expressionless, speaking in a flat, emotionless tone. His words were strange, filled with rage and self-pity. "You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today," he said, "but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option." He compared himself to martyrs, to Jesus Christ, to revolutionaries who died for a cause, except his cause was a delusion of vengeance against people he believed had wronged him. He then took a series of photos, holding his guns, pointing them at the camera, staring into the lens with blank eyes. In one photo, he posed with a hammer. In another, he wore a black vest and gloves. He arranged these materials carefully, adding a manifesto that rambled through his grievances against rich kids, debauchery, and hypocrisy. Then he sealed the package in a large manila envelope, wrote NBC News on the front, and left the dorm. At 9 a.m., Cho walked through the campus courtyard, past groups of students who paid him no attention. He was just another face among thousands. No one noticed the weight of his backpack or the strange determination in his walk. He reached the Blacksburg post office at 9 a.m. and 1 minute and mailed the package. Postal records would later confirm that it was sent during that brief window between the two attacks. The package would arrive in New York 2 days later, long after the massacre was over. Back at the university, confusion spread among administrators and campus police. They were still piecing together the morning's events. At 9 a.m. and 26 minutes, a campus-wide email was finally sent to all students and staff. It read, "A shooting incident occurred at West Ambler Johnston earlier this morning. Police are on the scene and are investigating. The university community is urged to be cautious and report anything suspicious." The message was brief, vague, and gave no indication that 2 people had been killed or that a shooter was still at large. Many students didn't even see the email right away. Some had already left for class. Others ignored it, assuming it was a minor altercation. There was no siren, no text alert, no building lockdowns. At the time, Virginia Tech's emergency communication system was limited to email. The tragedy would later force a nationwide overhaul of such systems, but in that moment, the silence was deadly. As Cho walked back toward campus after mailing the package, he passed police cars heading in the opposite direction. Officers were still focused on West Ambler Johnston, unaware that the true threat was already on the move again. He stopped briefly at a dining hall to buy a cup of tea. Witnesses later remembered seeing a quiet young man sitting alone, staring blankly at the table. Nothing about him seemed unusual. By 9 a.m. and 40 minutes, Cho arrived near Norris Hall, a large academic building located on the other side of campus. Inside, professors were lecturing, chalk squeaking against blackboards, students taking notes. Norris Hall housed the engineering, science, and mechanics department, along with several foreign language classes. It was a hub of intellectual life, filled with bright minds and dedicated teachers. Cho entered through a side door, surveyed the halls, then left again. It's believed he returned to his dorm one last time, possibly to reload his guns and gather more ammunition. He also may have prepared his suicide plan during that window, setting his affairs in order, deleting files, leaving no trace of digital life behind. He removed his hard drive, later found completely destroyed. He even scratched off serial numbers from his handguns, making them harder to trace. Every step was methodical, calculated. At 9 a.m. and 45 minutes, the police finally confirmed that the boyfriend of Emily Hilscher was not involved. He was being interviewed off campus and had a solid alibi. That realization should have changed everything, but it came too late. The assumption of a domestic dispute had already delayed a campus-wide alert for nearly 2 hours. Meanwhile, students in Norris Hall were preparing for their mid-morning lectures. In room 206, Professor G.V. Loganathan was teaching advanced hydrology. In room 204, Liviu Librescu was guiding his students through the principles of flight dynamics. On the third floor, language students practiced German phrases, unaware that death was minutes away. Outside, Cho began chaining the building's main entrances shut. He used heavy-duty locks and steel cables he had purchased days earlier. He looped them through the doors, tightening them with pliers, ensuring that once he began shooting, no one could escape, and no one could enter to stop him. He even placed a note on one door warning that if anyone tried to open it, a bomb would explode. There were no explosives, but the warning kept rescuers away just long enough. At 9 a.m. and 50 minutes, students passing by Norris Hall heard faint metallic sounds, clinking, rattling, as if someone were repairing something. But it was Cho preparing his trap. By 9 a.m. and 55 minutes he was inside, walking through the hallways toward the classrooms. He carried both pistols loaded, extra magazines tucked in his jacket. His footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floors. A few students saw him and thought he looked lost. One survivor later said, "He peeked into the classroom twice. I thought he was looking for someone. No one knew the massacre was about to begin." At 10 a.m. sharp, as professors began their lectures, Cho raised his gun and fired the first shot. The sound of it, loud, sharp, and echoing through the narrow hallways, broke the morning silence like shattering glass. Panic spread instantly. Students screamed, chairs fell, doors slammed. Some thought it was a drill until they saw the blood. Police received the first emergency call at 10 a.m. and 5 minutes. Within minutes, chaos engulfed Norris Hall. The silence that had blanketed Virginia Tech for the past 2 hours was gone, replaced by terror, confusion, and the relentless sound of gunfire. At 10 a.m. sharp, the first gunshots echoed through Norris Hall. The sound was deafening in the narrow corridors, bouncing off the walls, amplifying the terror. Students and professors froze in confusion, not yet realizing that death had entered the building. The first rounds tore through room 206, where Professor G.V. Loganathan was teaching his civil and environmental engineering class. He had no time to react. Within seconds, the professor was shot and killed, and panic erupted. Students dove for cover, some hiding under desks, others crawling toward the back of the room, their hearts pounding, their minds struggling to process what was happening. Cho moved methodically, shooting at anyone in sight. He didn't yell, didn't speak, didn't hesitate. Witnesses later described him as eerily calm, almost robotic. He reloaded quickly, switching magazines with practiced precision. When the first clip emptied, another was already in his hand. Each gunshot sounded like an explosion, each one echoing down the hall, each one claiming another victim. Students in neighboring classrooms heard the chaos. Some thought it was construction noise at first, until the screams began. In room 2004, across the hall, Professor Liviu Librescu, a 76-year-old Holocaust survivor and aeronautical engineering professor, immediately understood the danger. He shouted for his students to barricade the door with tables and desks. As they scrambled to push furniture against the entrance, Librescu stood by the door, using his body to block it. Moments later, Cho tried to force his way in. He fired several rounds through the door, the bullets tearing through the wood, hitting the professor. Even as he was shot, Librescu held the door shut, shouting for his students to jump out the windows. The classroom was on the second floor, about 12 feet above the ground. One by one, students climbed through the window and jumped. Most survived with broken bones or bruises, but they lived because of him. When police finally entered the building, they found Professor Librescu's body by the door, his students gone, his final act, one of unimaginable courage. Down the hall, in room 207, another professor, Jamie Bishop, was teaching German. When Cho entered, Bishop was shot instantly. Students dove under desks, hiding behind backpacks and chairs. Cho fired relentlessly, bullets splintering wood and glass. Some students played dead, lying motionless among the wounded. One survivor later said, "He was just standing there, reloading calmly. He didn't say a word." Cho moved from classroom to classroom, room to room, reloading as he went. Each time he fired with precision, targeting students who tried to run or hide. He revisited rooms he had already attacked, checking for survivors. The building's hallways were filled with smoke, screams, and the smell of gunpowder. Blood trailed across the floors, marking the path of his rampage. In room 211, students had already barricaded the door. When Cho tried to enter, they pushed with all their strength, holding desks and tables against the frame. Cho fired through the door, but the barricade held. He moved on, frustrated. That quick thinking saved everyone inside. In another classroom, room 205, Professor Jocelyn Couture, Nowak, who taught French, tried to calm her students as they hid behind desks. Cho entered suddenly, firing. Couture, Nowak, and several of her students were killed instantly. Survivors recalled the smell of gunpowder, the ringing in their ears, and the sight of Cho's emotionless face as he shot without expression. Outside Norris Hall, police received the first emergency call at 10 a.m. in 5 minutes. Officers raced toward the building, sirens blaring. By 10 a.m. in 9 minutes, the first patrol cars arrived. Officers could hear gunfire from inside, but when they reached the main doors, they found them chained shut with heavy locks and cables. They tried to break the chains, but it took time. Cho had designed it to delay them. Every second counted. Inside, the massacre continued. Students called 911 from under desks, whispering through tears, giving room numbers, pleading for help. Dispatchers tried to calm them, assuring them police were coming. By 10 a.m. and 12 minutes, the second-floor hallway was a nightmare. Survivors later said the sound of gunfire was constant, not bursts, not isolated shots, but a relentless rhythm. Cho fired, reloaded, and fired again. Each magazine carried 10 or 15 rounds. He carried 19 magazines in total, over 170 rounds. In room 26, only 4 of 13 students survived. Some had hidden under the bodies of their classmates, playing dead. In room 207, 5 students survived by lying motionless, pretending to be lifeless as Cho walked past. In room 211, every student lived, protected by the barricade. At 10 a.m. and 17 minutes, police finally breached the building through a side entrance. They began moving cautiously through the hallways, guided by the sound of gunfire. As they advanced, the shots suddenly stopped. The silence was abrupt, jarring. Then, one final gunshot echoed through the hall. At 10 a.m. and 19 minutes, Cho had turned one of his guns on himself. A single shot to the head ended his life. When officers reached the second floor moments later, they found his body in room 211's hallway, surrounded by dozens of shell casings. His two handguns lay beside him, empty magazines scattered like debris. The entire second assault had lasted only about 12 minutes. In that short time, Cho had fired more than 170 rounds, killed 30 people, and wounded 17 others. Many of the dead were shot multiple times. 28 of them were struck in the head. It was the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. One man, two handguns, 12 minutes, an unimaginable loss. When police secured the scene, the building was a vision of horror. Classrooms filled with bodies, blood pooling under desks, walls riddled with bullet holes. Officers found students hiding under tables, others huddled in corners, trembling, crying, unable to move. Some survivors were carried out by police and medics. Others walked out in shock, their faces pale, clothes stained with blood. Outside, the campus was in chaos. Police, SWAT teams, and paramedics swarmed the area. Helicopters circled overhead. Students who had jumped from windows were treated for broken bones and cuts. Some screamed for their friends, calling names that would never be answered. By 10 a.m. and 30 minutes, the university was finally placed on lockdown. All classes were canceled. The entire campus was shut down. News began to spread, first by phone, then by text, then across the internet. Parents called frantically. Reporters rushed to the scene. For hours, no one knew how many had died, who the shooter was, or why it had happened. By 11 a.m., police confirmed that the gunman was dead. They searched his body and found a student ID, Seung-Hui Cho. Investigators moved quickly to identify him, tracing the weapons, searching his dorm. Within hours, his disturbing past began to surface. His mental health history, his previous incidents, his writings, his quiet rage. By the end of the day, the numbers were staggering. 32 people were dead, 27 students and 5 faculty members, plus the gunman. 17 others were wounded, many critically. All of the dead were shot at least 3 times. The massacre at Virginia Tech would remain etched in history, not only for its scale, but for the courage shown in those final minutes. Professor Librescu, who gave his life blocking the door. The students who held barricades, whispering prayers. The young men and women who jumped from windows to survive. In the space of 12 minutes, a university, a community, and a nation were changed forever. When the gunfire stopped, a haunting stillness fell over Norris Hall. It was 10 a.m. and 20 minutes. The air was thick with smoke and dust. The hallways littered with shell casings and broken glass. Police officers moved cautiously through the building, stepping over backpacks, notebooks, and pools of blood. Radios crackled with urgent voices. Second floor clear, shooter down, multiple casualties. The gravity of what had happened was almost beyond comprehension. Outside, emergency vehicles filled the streets. Students stood huddled together in disbelief, watching as ambulances carried away the wounded. Many were crying, trembling, clutching phones that wouldn't stop ringing. Parents, miles away, frantically called their children, desperate for any sign of life. The entire Virginia Tech campus, once alive with laughter and movement, had fallen into a surreal silence broken only by sirens and sobs. By noon, news outlets across the country were reporting a mass shooting at Virginia Tech University. But the scale of it, the sheer number of lives lost, wouldn't become clear until later that afternoon. At first, officials spoke cautiously, confirming multiple fatalities. Then the number rose, 10, 20, 30. The nation watched in horror as the true toll emerged. 32 victims, not including the gunman. It was the deadliest school shooting in American history. Inside Norris Hall, the forensic teams began their grim work. Bodies were carefully identified, room by room. Many of the victims were found in the positions they had taken to shield others, teachers protecting students, students protecting classmates. In room 244, investigators found the body of Professor Liviu Librescu still near the door, slumped against the wall. The furniture he had used to barricade the room was splintered and blood-stained. His students, who survived by jumping from the window, later said his last words were, "Go, go now." In room 206, Professor G.V. Loganathan's students lay scattered across the floor, notebooks open, pens still clutched in hands that would never move again. In other rooms, survivors whispered quietly to police, recounting what they had seen.